In the heart of a fog-covered forest near Millwood, Oregon, a puppy lies motionless, half buried in wet leaves, its legs bound by rusted wire. Locals whisper of a madman in the woods, but what if he's not the villain? What if we've judged the wrong soul? And the only one who tried to save this dog was the one we feared most. This isn't just a story about cruelty. It's about redemption, forgiveness, and a silent plea for love that might just change a whole town. Millwood, Oregon, was the kind of town where the fog arrived before sunrise and clung to the earth like a forgotten ghost. Autumn was dying into winter now. The air carried the smell of wet bark and decaying leaves, and even the birds seemed reluctant to sing. Along the outskirts of this quiet town, beyond the winding dirt trails and collapsing fences, lay the forest, dense, cold, and always watching. And hidden in that forest was a man no one wanted to know. Eldon Blake hadn't spoken to anyone in town for at least 2 years. He lived alone in a weathered cedar cabin that had once been a ranger's post, its roof now sunken at the corners, its windows clouded with moss and dirt. Eldon was a man of 57, tall and gaunt, with a wiry frame that moved like a shadow between trees. His gray hair was always hidden beneath a dark wool cap, and his eyes, ice blue and deeply sunken, held the stare of someone who had seen too much. He had once been a firefighter in Seattle, until the day a fire collapsed on his unit and took 3 men with it. Eldon walked out of those flames covered in ash and silence. PTSD had settled into him like smoke in his lungs, and with it came isolation. He no longer looked people in the eye, no longer answered questions. The only sound that sometimes echoed from his cabin was the murmur of old vinyl records and, as the rumors claimed, the occasional chilling howl of a dog. Nobody saw Eldon come to town anymore. Groceries were delivered to a roadside drop box. Tools and firewood were bartered through slips of paper. Children dared each other to walk past his driveway, claiming they'd seen glowing eyes in the trees or the silhouette of a chained beast at dusk. One girl swore she'd heard barking, followed by something screaming. Then, one cold morning, just after the first frost had silvered the tips of the ferns, 13-year-old Milo Carmichael wandered too deep into the woods. Milo was a thin boy with a mop of curly brown hair, hazel eyes always wide as if expecting magic or danger at every turn, and a scratchy red hoodie that had once belonged to his older brother. He had a habit of disappearing into the woods to escape the noise at home. His father's temper, his mother's crying, the TV that never turned off. But that day, Milo wasn't chasing silence. He was following something strange, a trail of paw prints, tiny, uncertain, broken by smudges of red. He found the dog beneath a crooked pine where the forest floor dipped like a forgotten grave. The creature didn't move when Milo approached. Its body was half covered in damp leaves, fur-soaked and matted, one paw twisted at an impossible angle. A thin coil of rusted wire wound around its hind legs and throat, tying it to the gnarled roots like a criminal in stocks. It was a German shepherd puppy, no more than 4 months old. Its coat, meant to be golden and black, was smeared in mud, blood, and pine needles. Its ribs were sharp against its sides, its ears drooped, and its eyes, though barely open, were filled with something ancient. Pain, but not surprise. As if it had learned early that the world was not kind. Milo fell to his knees. He didn't speak. His breath fogged the air as he fumbled for his pocket knife, hands trembling. "It's okay, boy," he whispered, though his voice cracked under the weight of fear. I'm gonna help you." The wire cut his fingers as he worked. The dog whimpered, soft, broken, and that sound sank into Milo's chest like an anchor. When he returned to the edge of the forest, clutching the limp puppy in his arms, the town noticed. And when they learned where he'd found it, less than 100 yards from Eldon Blake's property, the whispers turned into wildfire. "He's done it again," someone muttered in the cafe. "I told you I heard a dog crying last week. Why hasn't anyone stopped that man?" The town of Millwood had long memories and quick judgment. By dusk, a crowd had gathered outside the sheriff's office. Mothers held their children closer. The hardware store owner, Donnie Pace, slammed a photo on the counter, an old picture of his missing beagle. "He's burying them out there," Donnie spat. "I seen him digging. At night." The sheriff, Leonard Marks, a tired man with thinning hair and a gut built from donuts and diplomacy, tried to calm the storm. But the truth was, Len had always found Eldon unsettling, too quiet, too still. And now a bleeding dog had shown up in the woods, bound and left to die. By the following morning, the rumors were gospel. Eldon Blake was a monster, a predator, a man with blood on his hands and cages in his soul. Only one person didn't seem convinced. Her name was Rhea Whitmore, a 35-year-old newcomer who had moved to Millwood from Chicago 3 months prior. Rhea was tall, with an athletic frame and almond skin. She wore her black hair in a loose braid, usually pinned beneath a gray beanie, and dressed in layered flannel and hiking boots like she was always ready to run. Rhea wasn't just a reporter. She was a survivor. A former war correspondent who'd walked away from a bombing in Kabul with shrapnel scars on her thigh and nightmares she refused to talk about. She had come to Millwood to escape the chaos of headlines, not to chase another story. But the look in Milo's eyes when he recounted the discovery, it wasn't fear. It was confusion, and that told her there was more beneath the leaves than blood. She watched as the town loaded their anger like rifles. Watched as the sheriff scribbled down a warrant. Watched Milo sit quietly at the vet clinic, holding the German shepherd's paw with both hands, as if trying to transfer warmth into a body that hadn't known kindness. The dog's name hadn't been given. But when the nurse asked, Milo simply said, "Ash, like the color." The nurse nodded and wrote it on the chart. Ash, male, approx. 4 months, severe lacerations, possible fracture, dehydration. And outside, the fog thickened. The forest held its breath. Because somewhere, deep among the trees and silence and half-truths, Eldon Blake sat on his porch, staring out into the woods. A thermos of black coffee rested untouched in his hands. His dog tags hung from a nail above the door, tarnished, rusting, forgotten. A record played softly inside, a woman's voice singing something bluesy and full of sorrow. He hadn't heard the voices yet, not yet, but he would. By the time the morning sun filtered through the mist, word of the wounded puppy had traveled from the church steps to the hardware store, from the high school parking lot to the diner's lunch counter. In a town like Millwood, silence only lived long enough to be slaughtered by suspicion, and suspicion had a name now: Eldon Blake. Sheriff Leonard Marks parked his cruiser just outside Eldon's rutted driveway. The tires crunched over frosted pine needles as he stepped out, adjusting his utility belt more from habit than necessity. At 53, Len was built like an aging linebacker. Broad-shouldered, with a gut he blamed on his wife's pies and knees that ached in the cold. He wore a weathered Stetson that shaded eyes used to watching people fall apart slowly. Len wasn't a man prone to rash judgment, but this case had stirred the town like gasoline to a flame. He knocked twice. No answer. Then again, firm and sharp. When Eldon finally opened the door, he stood silent, his gaze unreadable behind fogged glasses. He wore a dark thermal shirt, stained at the sleeves, and jeans that looked like they hadn't been washed since summer. His right hand trembled slightly, barely visible unless one looked closely. PTSD, Len remembered, a wound that never bled but never truly closed. "We need to talk," Len said simply. Eldon stepped aside without a word. Inside, the cabin smelled of cedar and something faintly metallic. Tools or old wounds, Len couldn't tell. A fire burned low in the hearth. Against the far wall sat a single bed with a threadbare wool blanket, and beside it, a battered food bowl, dry and cracked. On the shelf above the bed rested a photograph in a chipped frame. Eldon, 20 years younger, smiling alongside a German shepherd with alert ears and a proud stance. The dog's name, engraved on the collar in the photo, was Scout. Len studied the image for a beat too long. "That yours?" Eldon nodded once. "Where is he now?" "Dead, 3 winters ago." Len didn't press further. Instead, he walked the room slowly, eyes scanning for signs. Chains, crates, blood, but all he saw was time, rusted and quiet. On the floor beneath the window, a blanket lay rumpled, with patches of coarse black and tan fur clinging to its fibers. Fresh. "You been keeping another dog, Eldon?" No answer. Len turned to face him. "We found a pup in the woods, German shepherd, bound with wire, half dead." Eldon's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Len tried again. "Near your property. Same breed, same markings. Folks are talking." "They always do," Eldon said finally, his voice rough, like gravel scraping pavement. "Why didn't you report anything strange? You hear barking, see someone in the woods." Still silence. Len sighed and reached for his notepad. "You're not under arrest, but we're going to take a closer look. If you've got nothing to hide, I'm sure we'll clear this up." Eldon nodded once more and followed them without resistance. Meanwhile, outside the sheriff's office, a gathering storm was building. A dozen townsfolk had gathered, some holding coffee, others holding signs scrawled hastily on cardboard. "Protect our pets," one read. "Justice for the dog," read another. Among them stood Sarah Cole, owner of the local bookstore and the town's de facto voice of moral conscience. Sarah was in her early 60s, tall and lean, with silver curls always pinned in a bun and a firm jaw that rarely smiled unless absolutely necessary. A widow of 2 decades, she'd poured her grief into community organizing. When the library budget got slashed, Sarah raised the funds herself. When a stray cat gave birth in the church basement, she found homes for all 5 kittens in under a week. To many, she was a saint. To others, a storm wrapped in lace. "I warned y'all something was off with that man," she muttered, arms crossed tight over her wool shawl. "You think dogs cry at night for no reason?" "Maybe," said a young man nearby, "but we ain't got proof he did anything this time, Sarah." "That boy found the pup a stone's throw from Eldon's porch. That's enough for me." Behind the window of the sheriff's office, Rhea Whitmore watched silently, notepad resting on her lap. She sat cross-legged on an old bench, earbuds slung loosely around her neck, her phone recording everything. Idle chatter, stray accusations, the quivers in Sarah's voice when she mentioned the crying. Rhea had learned long ago that truth often wore masks made of fear. She hadn't slept much. The story had clawed into her mind overnight, the image of that puppy, Ash, half buried in leaves, bruised and bound. She remembered a similar image from years ago, a market alley in Syria, a bloodied mutt lying beneath the rubble, and the young girl who wouldn't leave its side. Rhea had carried that dog 3 miles to the nearest aid station. The medics had laughed. "You risked your life for that thing?" they'd asked, but the girl's smile, when the dog whimpered awake, had answered for her. Now, in Millwood, she sensed something similar beneath the noise. After the brief search of Eldon's cabin yielded no direct evidence, Sheriff Marks emerged to calm the crowd. "We're still investigating," he announced, "but right now there's no cause for charges." A low grumble rippled through the gathering. "What about the wire?" someone shouted. "The blood?" "We're looking into every angle." Sarah stepped forward. "He's hiding something. You think dogs bind themselves to trees?" "I'm not saying he's innocent," Len said carefully. "I'm saying we don't rush to hang a man without proof." Rhea watched Eldon from a distance. He stood beside the cruiser, arms at his sides, expression unreadable. Not angry, not defiant, just empty. She made a note. Later that day, she walked the perimeter of the woods where Milo had found Ash. The air smelled of pine sap and old sorrow. She crouched beside the tree, marked now by trampled leaves and police tape, and noticed something small and strange, a dent in the dirt a few feet away, shaped like a heavy boot heel. She glanced around. A broken branch overhead, no drag marks leading from Eldon's direction. She measured the angle. Whoever had tied the dog here hadn't come from Eldon's cabin. They'd come from the other side. Interesting. She took a photo, then stood still, listening. In the distance, a bird called. A gust of wind stirred the underbrush, and then, just for a moment, she thought she heard it again, whimpering. Faint. Farther out. Someone else had been in these woods, someone who hadn't been seen. Yet. Ash lay curled on a fleece blanket inside Millwood Animal Clinic, his breath shallow, his body trembling. A splint wrapped his right hind leg, and beneath the fur, still matted with blood and dirt, bruises bloomed like secrets. Fluids had been administered, painkillers too, but the German Shepherd puppy, barely 4 months old, remained ghost-like, present but drifting. The clinic's head veterinarian, Dr. Ellen Marlowe, sat beside him, her gloved hand gently stroking behind his ears. Ellen was in her early 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-creased skin, short red hair always pulled back into a tight ponytail, and a voice that rarely rose above a whisper. Years of tending to wounded animals had shaped her into a mixture of steel and softness. She didn't speak unless necessary and didn't flinch at blood, but when she first saw Ash, bound and shivering in Milo's arms, something in her cracked. "Who could do this?" she'd muttered under her breath. Ash whimpered suddenly, as if responding to a thought, and Ellen leaned closer. His eyes fluttered open briefly, one ear twitched, a memory passed across his face like smoke over water. Across the room, Milo sat cross-legged on the floor, his back against the wall, eyes glued to the dog he had rescued. He hadn't left since bringing Ash in, refusing food, ignoring calls from his mother. His jeans were stained with dirt, his hoodie ripped at the sleeve, but he didn't care. He just watched, as if his presence alone could will the dog back to life. Rhea Whitmore entered quietly, her notebook tucked under one arm, a worn satchel slung across her chest. She exchanged a nod with Ellen, then crouched beside Ash. "Any progress?" "Not much," Ellen murmured. "He's stable, but unresponsive. It's more than physical trauma. He's shut down, emotionally." Rhea looked down at the pup, her journalist's instinct already stirring. She pulled out her phone and played a soft song, a lullaby version of an old Billie Holiday tune. It was something she often listened to while riding. The moment the music began, Ash stiffened. His ears perked. His eyes opened slightly, and his body trembled. Not from fear, but recognition. A low whine escaped him. Rhea exchanged a glance with Ellen. That wasn't random. Ellen nodded slowly. That song meant something. Rhea added the detail to her notes. Ash reacts to music. Specific tune triggers response. Who used to play it? The next morning, with Ash sleeping soundly, Rhea set out with a list of names, people who had reported missing pets in the last 6 months. The sheriff had begrudgingly provided it after some coaxing. She focused on the edges of the woods where disappearances clustered unnaturally. It wasn't just dogs. A few cats, even a goat, all vanishing without explanation. She started with Mrs. Letty Carson, a retired schoolteacher living alone in a yellow clapboard house with ivy-covered walls. Letty was small, hunched, with silver-white hair in a bun, and eyes that still sparkled with mischief. She wore thick spectacles and a green knit sweater with a stitched portrait of her late beagle, Buttons. "I lost him in June," Letty said, sipping tea from a chipped mug. "One minute he was in the yard, next minute, gone. I heard barking that night. Strange barking, not Buttons, different, wild." "Did you report it?" Rhea asked. "To who? Len? He told me dogs run off sometimes. Said I was just old and forgetful." Rhea made a note. "Anyone else in the area lose pets?" "Darla Pelham up the road, and that gruff old man, Jenkins, I think, lost 2 border collies, but he doesn't talk much, lives near the West Trail." Rhea thanked her and moved on. Each visit added layers to the story. Disappearances dismissed, cries at night ignored, fear covered by routine. She began mapping them on a small notebook. Dots clustered like a net tightening around the forest. When she reached the western edge of Millwood, she met Darla Pelham, a divorced postal worker in her 50s with sharp cheekbones, weathered hands, and a relentless energy. She wore a bandana over her gray-streaked hair and smelled of coffee and cigarettes. "I ain't one to believe in ghost stories," she said, tapping ashes from her cigarette. "But there's something wrong in those woods. My lab mix, Charlie, vanished last September. I heard screaming that night. Not human. Something else." Rhea asked if she'd ever seen traps. Darla paused. "Not with my own eyes, no. But there's a hunter, Roy Jennings, runs a training camp just across county lines. People say he does more than train dogs. You didn't hear that from me." Rhea circled his name. It was the first solid lead. Someone with a motive, someone outside the usual gossip circuit. She'd visit him next. That night, back at the clinic, Ash stirred again. Ellen had left a small radio playing in the corner, soft jazz humming into the silence. Ash's ears twitched. He let out a low bark, his first vocal sound since arriving. Milo, who was dozing in a chair, jolted awake. He knelt beside the puppy, eyes wide. "Ash?" he whispered. Ash looked at him, this time fully. Recognition flickered. His tail moved slightly, one twitch like a candle's first flicker. Milo burst into tears. Rhea arrived moments later, drawn by the commotion. She saw the boy, the dog, and the music connecting them. "He remembers," she murmured. "Yes," Ellen said, "and he's starting to trust again." But Rhea knew trust wouldn't be enough, not if the real predator was still out there. She spent that night at her desk, cross-referencing names, dates, coordinates. She marked a trail, one that didn't point to Eldon Blake. The pattern was deliberate, controlled. Someone had been capturing animals methodically, using traps, the kind hunters use. She found an archived article from 3 years prior. Controversy over dog training facility near county line. The article featured a photo. Roy Jennings, a thick-set man with a buzz cut and a smug grin, holding up a rifle and surrounded by dogs in cages. Legal, but barely. The next morning, Rhea drove out to the edge of the county toward a compound obscured by trees and fences. As she stepped from her car, barking erupted. Sharp, aggressive, and too numerous to be casual. A man emerged from behind a shed. "Roy." "Can I help you?" he asked, wiping grease from his hands, eyes narrowing. Rhea smiled politely. "Just asking questions about a dog." The forest was quieter than usual that morning, as if the wind itself had chosen not to speak. Frost clung stubbornly to the underbrush, and the sun, reluctant and pale, filtered only half-heartedly through the thinning branches. Milo Carmichael knew he shouldn't be out here, especially not alone, but something pulled him back. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the ache in his chest that hadn't gone away since Ash's eyes had blinked open and met his. He moved carefully along the same trail he'd taken the day he found Ash, stepping over tangled roots and ducking beneath moss-covered limbs. His breath came in clouds. The backpack he carried held only a flashlight, a granola bar, and his mother's old red scarf, tied around his wrist like a quiet token of luck. He didn't hear the trap until it clicked. The sound was sharp, metallic, and cruel. Pain exploded in his right ankle as the rusted steel teeth of a forgotten bear trap snapped shut. Milo screamed, a sound that tore through the still woods, echoing off stone and bark alike. He collapsed sideways, leaves sticking to his palms, tears stinging his face. His voice trembled between gasps. "Help! Please, somebody!" And then, rustling, not from behind, from the side. A figure emerged from between the trees, moving fast but without panic. Tall, cloaked in a thick brown jacket and weather-worn jeans, his boots crunching on frost. Eldon Blake. The man knelt beside Milo without a word, pulling a small pry bar from the satchel slung across his back. His eyes, cold but clear, focused entirely on the trap. "Breathe," he said, voice graveled. "Don't move your leg." I didn't mean," Milo sobbed, but Eldon had already begun loosening the hinge. With practiced care, Eldon pried open the jaws and pulled the metal back, freeing Milo's leg. The boy winced as Eldon tore a strip of cloth from his own sleeve and wrapped it around the ankle, his hands surprisingly steady for someone who'd lived so long alone. "There," Eldon murmured. "It'll hold till you get to the clinic." Milo looked up, blinking through tears. Why are there traps out here?" Eldon exhaled through his nose. "They're old. Some newer, hunters, poachers, or worse. But why didn't you tell anyone?" "They don't listen. They never have." He helped Milo up, slinging the boy's arm over his shoulder, bearing the weight with surprising strength. They walked slowly, deeper into the woods, but toward a side path, one few people knew about. After a few minutes, the trees gave way to a clearing. There, nestled against a slope, was Eldon's cabin. Not the one people saw from the road, but a smaller structure behind it. A hidden place. Milo stared as they entered. The inside was dim, lit only by firelight and a single hanging bulb. But what struck him wasn't the darkness, it was the life. The walls were lined with shelves filled with dog bowls, collars, leashes, and jars of salve. In the corner, a handmade cot rested beneath a fleece blanket embroidered with paw prints. A faded rug bore chew marks, and fur clung to the floor like forgotten memories. "You lived here with a dog," Milo said quietly. Eldon nodded once. "Scout." He sat the boy down, poured warm water into a basin, and washed the dried blood from Milo's ankle. "He was smarter than most people. Brave, too. Pulled me from a fire once." "What happened?" Eldon paused, then said, "He died saving a pup. Same place I found Ash." Milo's eyes widened. "That's where I buried him," Eldon continued. "I still go back sometimes. That's why I was near when you screamed." Milo was silent for a moment, then, "Everyone thinks you're a monster." Eldon gave a humorless laugh. "They think what's easiest. But you saved me." "I didn't always," he said quietly, eyes fixed on the floor. "There was another pup, 2 winters ago. I found it too late. I stopped trying after that. Told myself it hurt too much." "But you didn't stop completely," Milo whispered. "You helped Ash." At the name, Eldon's shoulders stiffened. He looked up, eyes suddenly sharp. "Is he—" "He's alive," Milo said. "He wagged his tail last night. He remembers things. Music. People." Eldon stared at the fire for a long time before speaking. "He was outside my cabin. Someone threw him over the fence in the middle of the night. I tried to help, but he bit me. Ran off before I could catch him. The next day, he was gone. Why didn't you tell anyone? Would you have believed me?" Milo lowered his eyes. "No, I guess I wouldn't have." Eldon stood and rummaged through an old metal cabinet. He pulled out a worn map and unfolded it across the table. "You see this trail?" he pointed. "That's where I found the broken baits last week. Not mine. Someone else has been setting traps. Do you think the same person who hurt Ash?" Eldon didn't answer. He just traced his finger across the map, stopping at a ridge near the county line. "This area, this isn't just bad luck. Someone's collecting animals, and it's not for hunting." Milo's pulse quickened. "Can we stop them?" Eldon looked at the boy with something like disbelief. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Maybe." The sky above Millwood had darkened with the weight of approaching winter, casting a gray hush over the town. The forest, once golden with fall, now stood skeletal, its branches clawing at the wind. And inside a small, aging Subaru rattling along a dirt road, Rhea Whitmore gripped the steering wheel with tense fingers. She was headed toward Jennings Ridge, an off-the-grid stretch of forest land just beyond the county line. Her destination was a private compound owned by a man named Roy Jennings, known in Millwood as the affable owner of Ridgeback Hunt Camp. To most, he was a rugged outdoorsman, always quick with a laugh and a handshake, always happy to sponsor local events with his trademark venison chili. But Rhea had seen a different side of him, captured in grainy footage from one of Eldon's old trail cameras. The video was time-stamped 2 weeks before Ash was found. In it, Roy walked with a chain leash dragging behind him, muttering curses. At the end of the leash, a German Shepherd puppy, limping, ribs visible, collar half broken. Roy yanked it hard, and when the pup lunged toward a discarded hunk of meat, he struck it across the face with the back of his hand. The dog whimpered, then collapsed. That dog, Rhea knew without question, was Ash. Rhea's jaw clenched as she turned down a narrow gravel drive, headlights slicing through the fog. The compound came into view, an ugly sprawl of tin-roofed sheds, chain-link kennels, and a main cabin painted hunter green. Barking erupted from all directions, deep, agitated, many voices. Too many. Roy stepped out of the main building, wiping his hands on a stained flannel shirt. He was in his late 40s, stocky and broad, with thinning blonde hair and a thick neck that disappeared into his shoulders. His face, once boyish and tanned, had hardened into something meaner over the years. He smiled when he saw Rhea, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, well, reporter lady, what brings you all the way out here?" "I've got questions," Rhea said, stepping out, her boots crunching on frozen gravel. "About a puppy, about traps, about what you've really been doing out here." Roy laughed, a hollow sound. "You don't quit, do you?" "I have footage," she said, "from a wildlife cam. It shows you with a German Shepherd pup. You hit him." His smile faded. "You trespassing now?" "The sheriff will have a copy by noon. Thought I'd offer you a chance to explain first." He stepped closer. "Look, I train dogs for hunt and search contracts. Some don't make the cut. Some get aggressive or too soft. That's not cruelty. It's business. You starved that puppy." "You mean the one Eldon stole from me? Yeah, I remember him. Bit me, ran like hell." Rhea's eyes narrowed. "So you admit it?" "I admit nothing illegal," Roy said, his voice tightening. "You got no proof that pup was mine. You try to slander me in town, you'll lose." Rhea didn't flinch. "You're not above the law, Jennings." He chuckled again. "In this county, I practically am the law." She turned and walked back to her car without another word, but her hands were shaking. Back in Millwood, Sheriff Len sat behind his desk, rubbing his temples. He had seen the footage, he'd heard the audio, but he also knew Roy. Roy donated to the sheriff's kids' softball league. Roy paid his taxes early. Roy didn't seem like the type. Across from him sat Eldon Blake, arms crossed, shoulders squared with quiet resolve. He had come voluntarily after Rhea showed him the video. "He's been doing this for years," Eldon said. "Used to bring dogs to my old station. Told folks they were strays. Said he was training them. Truth is, he beat them into obedience or dumped them when they didn't obey." "You have proof of that?" Len asked. "No," Eldon replied, "but I have scars." The sheriff exhaled slowly. "Look, I can't arrest a man because he's disliked, but Milo's statement helps. If I can get confirmation Ash was ever on Roy's property—" "Milo nearly lost his leg to a trap," Eldon cut in. "One of Roy's. He said it near where Ash was found." "That's circumstantial. You want more? I'll give you more. I've got Ash's blood on my porch. I've got old collars Roy threw in my woods. He's been using my land as a dumping ground." Sheriff Len leaned back, thoughtful. Then, as if on cue, Milo walked in. The boy looked small in the office. His foot bandaged, his hoodie too large, but his voice didn't shake when he spoke. "I saw the trap. Eldon saved me. He didn't hurt Ash. He didn't hurt anybody." Len looked at both of them. Then he picked up the phone. That evening, as the sky turned to bruise and the clinic lights flickered on, Eldon stepped through the door. Ash was awake, lying in his crate with his head on his paws. When Eldon entered, the pup stirred. Slowly, cautiously, he lifted his gaze. Eldon knelt by the cage, saying nothing. Ash inched forward, his nose pressing to the bars. Eldon reached out, palm up. For a moment, everything held still. The room, the shadows, even breath. Then Ash pressed his snout into Eldon's palm and closed his eyes. Something fragile passed between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but memory. Eldon's voice cracked. "You made it." The morning after the article went live, the wind shifted over Millwood. The clouds parted enough for sunlight to sneak through, casting golden beams across storefronts that hadn't known warmth in weeks. On the front porch of the Millwood General Store, a group of elderly men passed a single phone back and forth, their brows furrowed and lips pursed as they read the headline from Rhea Whitmore's article, "The Man We Misjudged." Just below the title, a photo, Eldon Blake kneeling beside Ash, the pup's head resting trustfully against his hand. It wasn't just a story. It was a reckoning. Within hours, the town buzzed with stunned disbelief, shame, and for the first time, curiosity. Sarah Cole, the silver-haired matron of morality and community firebrand, read the article twice that morning at her kitchen table. She sat rigid in her chair, her pressed blouse stiff around her shoulders. The lines in her face, once hard with judgment, softened slightly as she reached for her tea. Her late husband had once been accused, falsely, of neglecting a dog during his time as a park ranger. She remembered how quickly people turned, perhaps too quickly. By noon, handwritten notes appeared on Eldon's front gate. "We're sorry. Thank you for saving Ash. We didn't know." No signatures, just penitent ink and late-blooming conscience. Inside his cabin, Eldon sat in his patched armchair staring at the folded newspaper on his lap. His glasses sat crooked on his nose, and his shirt, unbuttoned at the top, revealed the old burn scars across his collarbone, ghosts of a fire long past. Ash dozed beside him on a wool blanket, one paw twitching occasionally in dream. Eldon's fingers brushed the pup's ear. "Guess they know now," he murmured. Ash responded with a lazy thump of his tail. That afternoon, a knock came at the door. Milo stood there with 3 other kids from town, 2 girls and a boy, all about his age. They wore muddy jeans and determination. Milo's expression was a mix of guilt and hope. "We want to help," he said, "with the yard for Ash." Eldon blinked. "The yard?" "So he can run," said the shorter girl, a freckled brunette named Katie, who had once thrown rocks near Eldon's fence out of fear. "He needs space." The taller boy, Julian, added, "And we heard you used to fix fences and stuff. Maybe you could show us?" Eldon looked at them for a long moment, then nodded once and opened the door wider. Over the next 3 hours, the property came alive in a way it hadn't in years. Milo's group pulled weeds, raked leaves, stacked wood, and even planted a small circle of shrubs near the clearing. Katie painted a sign that read, "Ash's Field," while Julian hammered together a low fence from reclaimed planks Eldon had stored under his shed. Ash watched it all from the porch, head tilted, tail wagging gently. Occasionally, he tried to rise. On his 3rd attempt, he managed a shaky step before sinking back down with a grunt. "He'll get there," Eldon said, standing beside Milo. "Yeah," the boy replied, "so will we." At sundown, Rhea arrived, camera slung over her shoulder and a thermos of coffee in hand. She wore her signature gray beanie and flannel, though her expression was softer than usual. The lines around her mouth, often set in focus, curved now in a rare, honest smile. "I heard your yard's famous now," she teased Eldon. He chuckled, an actual audible laugh, and Milo's jaw dropped slightly in disbelief. "You staying in town?" Eldon asked, wiping dirt from his hands. Rhea nodded. "I was thinking, maybe it's time to do something more than right. The town's ready for a change, and these dogs, we need somewhere for them. A real place." "A shelter?" Milo asked. "Better," she replied, "a sanctuary for dogs like Ash and people like Eldon." They stood in silence, watching the kids chase each other in the golden light, Ash barking once, as if cheering them on. "I want to learn," Milo said suddenly, "how to care for dogs, train them, like you used to." Eldon looked down at him, the shadow of a smile still on his face. "You sure?" The boy nodded. "I want to be good at something, and this feels right." Eldon paused. "All right, but we do it properly. No shortcuts. Scout didn't raise me easy. I won't raise you easy either." Milo grinned. "Deal." That night, for the first time in years, Eldon left his porch light on. Not because he was waiting for something, but because he was ready to let something in. Snow began to fall over Millwood with a gentleness that felt almost ceremonial. The streets wore a soft hush beneath the powdery white, and warm light spilled from windows where families huddled with cocoa and quiet conversation. The town, once tense and divided, had begun to breathe together again, if not in perfect unison, then at least in shared rhythm. But not far from the warmth of the town square, in the county courthouse at the edge of the woods, justice stood under colder light. Roy Jennings sat in the defendant's chair, jaw tight, eyes darting. Gone was the smug hunter with easy charm. In his place sat a man who had been cornered by his own carelessness and cruelty. His orange jumpsuit clashed with the gray of his thinning hair, and his hands, once firm and confident, twitched on his lap like nervous birds. The evidence was overwhelming. Illegal steel traps found buried on his property, undocumented canine sales, unlicensed breeding logs, and, damningly, the recovered footage Rhea had obtained. The courtroom wasn't full, but the few who came represented a silent reckoning. Sheriff Len sat in the back, arms crossed. Rhea leaned against the side wall, notebook tucked beneath one arm. Milo sat near the front, feet barely touching the floor, flanked by Katie and Julian. At the end of the second row sat Sarah Cole, her spine straight as ever, but her gaze more measured than in months past. The judge, a calm woman in her 60s named Joanne Whitner, known for her sharp tongue and merciless honesty, read the charges clearly. Her voice echoed in the chamber like falling ice. Roy pleaded no contest to two of the charges: illegal trapping and unlicensed trafficking. The rest would go to state court. Then the judge turned her gaze to Eldon Blake, seated quietly in the witness stand. "Mr. Blake," she said, "you were asked here not because you are a victim, but because the court believes your perspective matters. Would you like to speak?" Eldon rose slowly. He wore a clean button-down shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, exposing scars that shimmered faintly under the courtroom's fluorescent lights. His beard was trimmed, though still wild at the edges, and his boots were dusted with snow. He stepped to the podium and took a moment before he spoke. "I'm not here to condemn," he began, "not even him." He glanced once at Roy, then looked away. "I'm here because I was once written off, dismissed, misjudged, and I know what that can do to a man." He paused, steadying his breath. "I let that judgment turn me cold. I shut the door on the world, on people, on animals who needed help. I almost let that puppy die, because I was tired of carrying pain that didn't belong to me anymore. He looked out over the room, gaze lingering on Milo, then Raya. But something changed, he said, voice low, not just in me, in all of us. A dog, a broken half-dead pup, made us see each other again. That's all I've got to say. The courtroom held its breath. Then, slowly, Judge Whitner nodded. Thank you, Mr. Blake. A week later, on the first true night of winter, the town gathered in Millwood Park for the annual tree lighting ceremony. This year, something was different. Beside the towering fir adorned in white lights stood a new addition, a bronze plaque on a stone pedestal. The plaque read, "To Ash, the dog who made us look again." Beneath the inscription was an etching of Ash's face, eyes bright, ears perked, mouth slightly open as if in mid-bark. Ash himself stood nearby, tail wagging, now fully recovered. His coat had grown in thick and gleaming, the bald patches filled, the scars beneath softened by time and care. He wore a harness embroidered with "Honorary Dog of Millwood," and trotted happily between children's legs as they giggled and threw snowballs. Eldon stood quietly by the edge of the gathering, a thermos in hand. He was watching, not speaking. Watching Ash weave through a crowd that once feared him. Watching Milo hand out homemade dog biscuits from a basket. Watching Rhea, her coat dusted with snow, speaking to Sarah Cole with surprising ease. Sarah, for her part, had shown up with a stack of dog blankets hand-sewn by her book club. She'd even baked meat-flavored cookies, though she still refused to call them treats. When she approached Eldon that evening, she didn't offer a long apology. Just a nod, a gloved hand on his shoulder, and the words, "You proved us wrong. I'm glad you did." Later that night, back at his cabin, Eldon lit a fire and pulled out his old leather journal, the one he hadn't touched since Scout's death. He sat in the armchair by the hearth, Ash curled at his feet, and began to write. "I thought I had lost everything. Turns out I was just waiting to be found, maybe by a dog, maybe by a boy, or maybe by the part of me I'd buried alongside the past." He paused, smiling to himself. "The door is open now, and this time I think I'll leave it that way." Winter loosened its grip on Millwood with a gentleness that no one expected. The snow melted not in a rush, but in a kind of reverence, as if the land itself was exhaling after holding its breath too long, and just beyond the tree line, where the forest thinned into meadows scattered with wild thyme and soft moss, something new was beginning to grow. They called it Ash Haven. It started with a plot of land, 5 acres donated by the town after months of petitioning, paperwork, and quiet determination. The land had once been the edge of a timber operation, long since abandoned, where rusted equipment lay half buried in ivy. Now it was reborn. The first fences were built by Milo and Julian under Eldon's guidance, their hands red with effort and laughter. Raised garden beds bloomed with herbs for healing salves. Kennels were constructed, not cages, but cozy shelters with open space, shade, and thick bedding. At the heart of it all was a hand-carved wooden sign, mounted on 2 sturdy posts. Ash Haven, a place for the forgotten to be found. Ash, now nearly 1 year old, had become the sanctuary's soul. His frame had grown sturdy, but his eyes still carried the softness of survival. His coat shimmered in the sun, black and caramel gold, and he moved with a purposeful grace that belied the pup once left to die. Rhea had fitted him with a new harness, one labeled simply, "Guide Dog in Training." But everyone in town knew the truth. Ash wasn't just training to guide others. He already had. Children began to visit on weekends. Some were shy at first, afraid of dogs larger than themselves, but Ash had a way of disarming fear. He'd lie low, belly flat, tail wagging in slow, gentle beats. He let them come to him, and they always did. Katie, who had once feared even barking, now walked Ash proudly, holding his leash as if it were a lifeline. Eldon taught the kids how to feed, brush, clean, and most importantly, listen. Animals speak, he'd say. You just have to slow down enough to hear them. Eldon had changed in quiet ways. He still wore his flannel and boots, but the shadows beneath his eyes had lightened. He greeted neighbors now, even nodded at Sarah Cole when they crossed paths near the co-op. And every morning, before the kids arrived, he walked the perimeter with Ash. It had become a ritual. Man and dog tracing the sanctuary's border like silent sentinels. One day, a letter arrived at the postbox nailed to the fence. The envelope was plain, but the handwriting inside was trembling, penned by a man named Cal Thomas, a fellow firefighter who had served with Eldon decades ago. Eldon, I saw your name in the paper. I never forgot what you did in Seattle. You carried my brother out of that burning building. We all thought you died in that fire. I'm glad we were wrong. And I'm glad that dog found you. The world needs people like you, even if you don't always believe it yourself. Thank you. Eldon read it twice, then once more before folding it into his journal, just beneath the page where he had written about Ash's first steps. Meanwhile, Milo, now 13 and a half, sat at his kitchen table late one night with a school assignment in front of him. The prompt was simple. Write about someone who changed your life. He titled it, The Man with the Quiet Eyes. Most people thought he was dangerous. I used to think so too. But when I needed help, he came. He didn't talk much. He didn't have to. He saved a dog, then he saved me. And now he teaches us how to care, how to be patient, and how to see beyond what people show on the outside. He's not perfect, but neither am I. That's why he's my hero. He turned the page and began sketching Ash with a stick in his mouth, grinning like the king of the woods. At her desk above the cafe where she now rented a small apartment, Rhea stared at the final manuscript on her laptop. The title, Ash, the Dog Who Forgave Us All. It was part memoir, part investigation, part tribute, but mostly it was a letter to every broken soul who'd ever felt unseen. The last chapter wasn't about Ash's injuries or Eldon's pain. It was about what came after, healing, rebuilding, belonging. She closed the laptop and looked out at the horizon. The sanctuary lights glowed dimly in the distance like stars that had decided to fall just a little closer to Earth. That evening, Eldon and Ash sat together on a low hill near the northern edge of the property, where the trees grew thin and the wind smelled of pine. Ash sat upright beside him, tail curled neatly, ears forward. I used to think this forest was a curse, Eldon said softly. All that silence, all that dark. Ash looked up at him, then back to the trees. But now, it feels like a beginning. As twilight deepened, the last light of day broke through the branches, spilling onto the ground in long golden shafts. Ash watched it with calm eyes, no longer haunted, no longer afraid. Just waiting, just watching. The boy who had cried in the woods, the man who had been feared, the dog who had once trembled in the cold. They had all come home. There are stories that stay with us, not because they're loud or grand, but because they whisper truths we often forget. This was a story about a dog abandoned in silence, a boy searching for belonging, and a man buried beneath regret. But it was also about forgiveness, about light breaking through where no one thought it could. Ash didn't just survive, he brought people together. He reminded an entire town that even the most wounded souls can heal, that a heart once hardened can open again, and maybe, just maybe, that wasn't just coincidence. Maybe it was a kind of miracle. Because sometimes when the world turns its back, God sends us a sign. A bark in the night, a child's quiet courage, a stranger's helping hand. Not all angels have wings. Some have 4 legs and a story to tell. So if this story touched your heart, let it be more than just a video. Let it be a reminder that love can find us in the darkest woods, that no life is too broken to be redeemed, and that God's grace often shows up where we least expect it. Comment Amen below if you believe in second chances. Share this story with someone who needs hope today. Subscribe for more stories that restore faith in humanity, and may God bless every single soul who watches this, human or animal alike.